Kia ora tātou. It's great to be here with you all.
Kia ora. I'm David Van Vliet. This is Rodrigo Hill, and we'd just like to thank the organisers of this event for making it possible to present today.
Thank you, David. So we're just going to start here. I'm going to share our screen and get our presentation ready to go. David.
Awesome. So our presentation today has been titled Augmenting Community Narratives, an Exploration of Lens-Based Image and Publication Design. So this presentation advances a pedagogical case study that focuses on innovative ways of promoting visual literacy for undergraduate students through lens-based image making and digital technologies. This was offered at Auckland University of Technology, AUT, South Campus in Manukau City, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and it was offered as a Diploma of Arts, endorsed in Communication Design.
So about the design brief, it was focused on a community-based photography project where students had the freedom of choosing a theme or a narrative within their communities. The design brief is informed by post-photography ideas which are related to the discourse around photography's expanding field and the potential to overlap with other forms of multimedia and lens-based practices. It had also a strong expression component there where students work with abstract concepts, trying to express their ideas. And also it's connected to the expanded modes of representation, which we will discuss it more in this presentation, and the digital technologies involved. The design brief had a hidden curriculum component where students' values, worldviews, limitations, and potentials were taken into consideration. You also had a blog that was a form of visual journaling where students recorded and documented their process, reflective notes and research. The final outcome was adjusted to a digital publication in the blog, and it allowed the use of the smartphone as a common image making entryway apparatus.
So the semester structure that this course was run through was a 12-week semester plus necessary extensions to allow for COVID-19 lockdowns. And it was kind of comprised of 5 weeks of an iterative series of workshops where students were introduced to fundamental concepts of visual literacy and multimedia. And that was punctuated by a formative assessment at the end. And students then returned after this formative assessment to focus on their communities more closely and develop their photographic practices there.
So the brief had a very strong visual literacy component. And as we mentioned, it had the smartphone camera as a kind of entryway apparatus in charge of instigating this visual literacy component of the brief, where students became familiar with imagery and image making, especially digital image making processes. It also introduced light and kinds of light, ways of reading the light that are connected to photographic practices, and introduced also the digital SLR camera and then technical skills around manual shooting modes, language, and photographic conventions. The visual literacy component, we draw on John Sarkowski's essay, The Photographer's Eye, where he categorizes images and photographic practices in 5 different categories. There are the subject matter, detail, frame, which is to do with composition, and then time, which is to do with exposure and moving images as well, and vantage points, which is to do with aperture, angles, depth of field.
So as well as this visual literacy aspect of the brief, students were also introduced to multimedia and image manipulation. And this part of the brief was intended to create an understanding of the issues associated with online environments and provided students with skills to operate creatively and fluidly in an online environment. That's relatively fast-paced nature of an online environment. Students were asked to consider how motion might also expand the ways of representing people in place. So an example of this is a cinematograph that you see on the slide here, and how that might expand how community narratives are communicated in their publications, as well as augmenting these from within their digital publications to other blogs and online platforms where students could display and expand their work.
And just to add here, so the visual literacy component, our intentions were, to cover this component from core, from the start with a smartphone camera, then into digital photography conventions, and then into expanded lens-based practices and multimedia. So the photography practice and publication design component here, more specifically, in addition to those core conventions, fundamentals, and the introduction to manual shooting modes, students were also introduced to portraiture and photographic portraiture, more specifically, and modes of representation. We draw on the photo book as a useful entryway platform for students to get used to design, publication, and design practice in general, where they had to lay out text and images, establishing a sequencing and a layout, and also take in consideration the multimedia components and the incorporation of these components through the use of the QR codes.
So in light of what Rodrigo has just explained, here's an example of a publication design and spreads from one of the students' publication designs. And you can see that they kind of experimented not only with the sequence and order that the images appeared in, but also practice basic design conventions such as working with a grid structure and typography too. It's also shown here that the use of the QR code is on the page, and this linked these kind of multimedia images that were embedded inside of the image sequence out so that they could be shown in the full motion. And this kind of juxtaposition of these moving and still images opened up further routes of making meaning and kind of creating fuller ways to tell stories for the students.
Yeah, and it was great to see the publication design as a platform for students to make sense of their digital archives and bring them all together in order, as David outlined, to tell a fuller story, and also to deal with those core ideas they were dealing with. In this case here, the student was dealing with the idea of the concept of solitude in swimming, how this was translated from the community pool space and then into a lockdown context where the swimmer here in this case had to deal with the complexities of staying home and the lockdown, etc.
So here's some examples of covers that students made for their publications. And what was interesting was the degree of diversity that the students chose the communities and, what they were choosing to communicate, and these kind of sometimes abstract concepts and ideas that they were using was quite cool to see. And translating these lens-based practices into publication design as well.
So here's an example of, of the ways the students explored these different mediums. And, on one side, the cinematograph, which is a part of the multimedia component of the brief. And then on the other side, the still photograph. And this was particularly interesting for us as lecturers here, because it was connected to multimodalities in the multiple ways students explored in order to represent place, people, and their communities. And at the same time, keeping up to date with latest industry technologies, digital technology, and digital technologies in general. And again, this all brought together a fuller way of, for students to tell their stories and work through their concepts that were connected to their chosen communities. And also the thinking through those various modes of representation, reflecting on its affordances and its possibilities. So as part of our final remarks here, we believe that this pedagogical approach offers a valid framework for visual literacy and media education. And then in this case, specifically for first year students of art and communication design degrees. Again, the smartphone as an entryway apparatus and as an equitable entryway image making apparatus in this case for students to become familiar with visual literacy. In this case, again, digital visual literacy. And we also highlight the experiential learning aspect and the student-centered design studio approach.
Cool. What we also found effective was this collaborative process and attitude of the students, especially in the on-campus learning environments, where they could kind of build off each other's progress and work and encourage each other as well. Of course, taking into account the introduction of COVID lockdowns and the change of routes, we also found that creating a balance of flexibility and academic rigor was important, as each of these students had unique situations that kind of set them apart from other students. So being able to maintain a balance of flexibility so that these students could complete the projects while also gaining a meaningful experience through the brief was quite important.
Well, this brings us to the end of our presentation. I just want to say thank you to all the organizers. Thank you for listening. Kia ora, muito obrigado.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for listening.